But here's what I'm going to challenge you to think about as we are moving forward throughout the day. Um, this is about taking action. This is about doing things for the kingdom together that can't be done as we sit in our silos, or dare I say, in our various castles. And so at every step of this kind of summit, my team and I, we have leaned into figuring out how we can serve you and how we can come alongside of you as God has called you to do immeasurably more for the summit. So your part's pretty easy. Lean in, connect with new people, listen in to what maybe God's doing in some new ways, and being open to having some paradigms changed a little bit. My friends from across the globe, we are grateful that you're here, but I did want you to note this. This conversation will be primarily about what's happening in the US as these organizations are collaborating in the United States, but all of this is based on principles of movement. And so while we welcome you, my friends from the global church, we are grateful for all of you. You might just need to tweak your sensibility as you're listening into this conversation. And then as a follow-up, we're gonna follow up with you after the summit to ensure that we can serve you well. Because while we're going to be talking about movements and networks and collaboration in the United States and in North America, it's happening globally. And frankly, to my friends in the Northern Hemisphere, in North America, we have much to learn from our global partners who are doing some amazing things when it comes to collaboration. Just a couple of points for you to consider, why we are here. We have collectively, the three organizations that are partnering here, NewThing, Christ Together, Exponential, and our bonus partner, Houston Church Planting Network. We have all been talking about this for a number of months and have identified this opportunity to come alongside movement makers. We think you're the movement makers that we're talking about. That might be a network leader in the way that NewThing talks about it. It might be a city catalyst in the way that Christ Together talks about it. It might be something else. But what we are trying to do is build a tribe of practitioners. And we're hoping that this is a first taste of many that we can journey on together. There's going to be plenty of peer learning, and there'll be enough information, I hope, to get you kind of moving forward, but not overwhelmed with information, because this is more about connection and collaboration. All right. And so when we're here for the next couple of hours, here's what we're trying to accomplish. We want to inspire you a little bit to think outside of your existing paradigms. And the speakers that we have lined up are going to really lean into this. So I'm going to save it for them. We do want to just provide you some basic information about networks, what we think are trying to happen. We're going to define that for you. But at the end of the day, and here's the asterisk that I want you to underline, we want to do stuff together. We want to implement stuff. We want to get stuff moving for the kingdom. And so there's going to be a clear call to action for you by the end of this talk. One of the things that we'll be wrestling with, and I just wanted to present it, y'all don't know me super well yet. I know many of you, but I feel like the church has a real opportunity to lean into kingdom or more movemental principles here as we face the end of the first quarter of the century. I mean, can you believe we're closing in on 2025? And so this is a real opportunity, I think, for the church to just hit the pause button a minute and think about the future. And that's kind of the mindset that I'm asking you to think about. We're asking you to think about kingdom over castle building. And that metaphor might hit you a little bit differently today. Some of our speakers will go into that. But I wanted to set the stage for you because we believe collectively that the only way that Jesus' mission moves forward is through these elements. And so I feel like my sensibility leading NewThing and getting this global perspective is to see what God's doing through the Great Commission. Man, I love the Great Commandment. It's why I became a Christ follower. We are the people of love and grace and mercy. But I think one of the missing bits have been collaboration, and that's going to be a common theme. Let me just define a network, because you're going to hear it a little bit differently today, and we will do our best to define language as best we can. But when we are speaking about network, we're speaking about small clusters of churches working together as friends on mission. We're going to parse this out a bit, but I wanted to lay the stage so you're not confused about how we're using some of this language. My friends from Christ Together and Exponential will have some opportunity to speak into this for them. But when we are speaking about a network, and you'll hear from Dave Ferguson at NewThing, what we are talking about is a small cluster of churches with a missional identity working as friends on mission. Okay? So with that, I'm going to stop my screen and I'm going to invite our first speaker up to the board, if you will, Jason Stewart from Exponential. Jason, take it away, my friend.
Yeah, Patrick, thank you. And man, we're fired up to be a part of this conversation today and contribute to the collaboration around what you said, kingdom multiplication, moving from castles to kingdom, and hopefully what I get to share for a few minutes with everyone will contribute to the further conversation that's going to happen today. So at Exponential, I've been on the team for 7 years, and Exponential, we like to say we're here to help you multiply. And so a lot of people know us by our conferences. And if you've been a part of one of our conferences, maybe at our global conference in Orlando or some of our national conferences, we get to say, or we just get the privilege to convene leaders throughout the year. But we like to say we are not a conference, but we are a community with a cause, and that cause is kingdom multiplication, church multiplication, and why we gather here today. So, Patrick, I'm ready for you to throw up those slides and to walk through those if you're ready.
You got it. Let me get that going for you.
Yeah. What I'm going to share with everyone today is what we have come to describe at Exponential as the 5 levels of multiplication. And I'm honored to kind of kick off some of, I guess, the content and the conversation today because what we have found working with just numerous networks and denominations over the years as an organization that's about 19 years old is this framework that I have the privilege to share is we have found it just kind of gives language to us as church leaders and those of us who really have a heart for the kingdom and to see the kingdom advanced in our generation. It gives us some language and some handles on maybe what's happening, as you said earlier, Patrick, in the U.S. church, but also begin to think about and maybe even have a greater imagination of what God could do in us and through us. And our heartbeat here at Exponential is we want to help multiply your insights. And so maybe that's what this framework will do today. We want to multiply your strategic connections. And so that's why we're a part of this summit today. We also want to multiply your impact. And so we do that through just creating actionable principles and solutions to help accelerate multiplication. And so this framework that you see, the 3 circles, it came out of some conversations several years ago that some church leaders were together in a group called Future Travelers, who were just beginning to wrestle with the angst they all had to see a greater impact within the local churches they were leading, but maybe more of a collective impact in the U.S. church. And many of them began to articulate things like they were these church leaders who had very successful, probably, large churches, many of them, but they were wrestling with how do we not grow bigger churches, but how do we release more people into mission, into their local city? And they were running up against barriers for that. And so as the conversations began to, unpack more, this framework that you see here, these 3 circles, really became just trying to articulate a picture of what's happening in the U.S. church. And we began with the simple thoughts of like, most churches are subtracting, and then there's a lot adding, but there was a heart to how do we actually help churches multiply? And so simple math there of the minus plus and the X for multiplication. But as there was more thought put into it, we really began to see there's actually 5 kind of environments, or just realities, probably is better said, 5 realities of what's happening in the U.S. church. One, and you see these these 5 levels and each have a name. I'm going to walk through each of these for a second, but obviously churches that are subtracting are those churches that are just declining in attendance. They're declining in staffing, maybe income, and even just seeing people embrace Christ and call on the name of Jesus for salvation. These churches are characterized often by scarcity and survival. And without a turnaround, these churches will close. And so that's what we began to call level 1 subtracting. In comparing to that, level 2 plateau churches are churches who are kind of looking for the next catalyst to spark a season of growth. These churches have some combination of flat attendance, flat, kind of staffing and income and conversions. And so they may see temporary ups and downs, but kind of an overall trend, it's just flat. And then there's level 3 churches of addition who are adding. And obviously these churches are adding people, they're adding to their probably the contributions into their offering plate or now online giving. They see a growth in baptisms. And these churches, while they see added growth and impact, they're focused around leadership development, conquering kind of the next growth barrier. And those become what is the focus of the church. And then as we were beginning to say, okay, we want to see multiplying movements, we realized there's this level 4 in between adding and multiplying that we are calling reproducing churches. And these level 4 reproducing churches are beginning to see the value and priority of starting new churches. These new churches often, as we know, new churches reach more people as new believers and are more effective often in mission than established churches. And so they see their fruit as more than just fruit on their own tree, but they want to see fruit on other people's trees and have a dream of planting kind of the orchard metaphor, that they want to see new orchards that they can help establish. Now, level 4 churches, this kind of new church plantings are often very systematized and programmatic, but they as they reach out into starting new churches, they feel that tension of investing in the addition growth that they often see versus the reproducing and kingdom expansion. And then level 5 churches are those that are multiplying. And I think probably for a lot of us, and as we have found as we walk through these levels, it begins to give language and really tap into the heartbeat of why a lot of us even got into ministry. We want to see multiplication happen. And level 5 churches are characterized by this sense of releasing and sending everyday missionaries where they live, work, learn, and play. And they're releasing church planters to start new churches. And what we have found, these multiplying churches, it's so deeply embedded into the DNA of these churches that you would almost have to come up with a strategy to stop the multiplication. So these churches that plant churches see a higher conversion rate than other churches. They see disciple making to the 4th generation as a cultural norm and beyond as they help start new churches. And so as we looked at these 5 levels, we began to actually do some research and study on these 5 levels. And so about a decade ago, we initially saw there was only like 4% of churches that were reproducing and multiplying. And then 5 years ago, we did a study with Lifeway Research, and we found some good news. First, we did the research to say from level 1, 2, and 3, where are churches today? And 5 years ago, we saw that 35% of churches are in level 1 subtracting, declining. Another 35% are plateaued, and then 30% are adding. So those, and so I'm going to go ahead and name it. We know how to do math here at Exponential. So first, what you to focus on is level 1, 2, and 3 combined are that 100% of churches. 70% are subtracting or plateaued, and only 30% are growing in the U.S. context. But then we ask the question, how many are reproducing or multiplying? And out of that kind of baseline of subtracting, plateau, and adding, we found 7% of churches were reproducing. So that was good news that we saw an increase from 4% to 7%. But only less than 1%, almost enough that you could count on your hand, are actually multiplying, seeing multiple generations of church planting occur. And so what does 4 and 5, what does that look like? I mean, that's like I said earlier, where there for 4 is some systematized and focus on planting. 5 is multiple generations. And so subtracting begins and adding and multiplying as we look at these are really beginning to create kind of cultures. Maybe this gives you a little bit of texture to what this looks like. Level 1 and even kind of level 2 churches are often churches who have a culture or a mindset that says, please stay, the scarcity mindset. Level 3 churches, and that's kind of, we'll talk about this more in a second, but what we feel like has become the primary scorecard of success in the U.S. church, that a level 3 church is saying, please come. Their thinking, their mindset is all about growth, and growth is good, but we feel like there's something greater, and that's level 4 reproducing, and level 5 multiplying, where these churches are not saying please stay, please come, but they are telling their people, and there's a culture of saying please go into the harvest field in your neighborhood, your local community, in your workplace. Please go and be a missionary. Please go and start the new church, to that select people group, or to the other side of our community, or to another state in our region, whatever, but please go. And they're really moving in from a growth thinking to really movement thinking. And that's what we're going after. But here is kind of the big problem. And that's what we call the level 3 magnet. Because as I said, in the US context, level 3 has become the measure of success. It's the churches that have, what do you like, the ABCs, attendance, budgets, or attendance, buildings, and cash, or the 3 Bs, buildings, budgets, butts, and seats, right? However you want to kind of frame that out, but level 3 addition and growth has become the primary scorecard of success. And so you see, if you're in a level 1 or level 2 church today, that is your goal. You're trying to do everything you can to move to level 3. Those are the leaders of level 3 churches, are the ones who get the book deals and speak on the big stages. Those are the ones that we celebrate. And that level 3 attraction, the magnet to be a growing church and to be a bigger church and to show up on the lists, right? That becomes what our hearts begin to focus on and we value the most. But like we said, it's level 4 or 5 that is where we're going to see movement. But just like a magnet pulls from towards level 3, the challenge is that the level 3 magnet pulls both ways. It pulls both ways because the very things that we do as church leaders that move us to level 3 will be often the same things that keep us from moving to level 4 and level 5. We break it down often just as simple as what you do with your budget and your calendar. It's what you prioritize in your weekly calendar of how you spend your time. Is it more time on designing the program and leading the program, or is it more time in relational disciple making? Are you going to put money into the auditorium, into the Sunday programming, or are you going to begin to release dollars into your community, into church planting? That's often the challenge for us. And so we at Exponential, we get to come alongside leaders who are like, say, you're going to hear from Chad Clarkson in a minute from Houston Church Planting Network. And Chad, along with Bruce Wesley, started that because Bruce began to really wrestle with the scorecard of success. And I've got the privilege of hearing Bruce talk about that tension, but his pushing through to go to level 4, level 5. Or Tim Hawks, you're going to hear from Will Plitt in a minute, that he leads something called Christ Together that we love. And it came out of Tim's angst and yearning of, how do I reach my city? Or it's our friend Larry Walkermeyer, who's on our Exponential team, who realized he was leading a lake church. And God gave him this vision to be a river church. And over the last couple of decades, they planted dozens and dozens of churches, moving to be a level 4 church onto level 5. And Larry's great stories, many seasons, he was level 1, level 2. Why? Because he was sending and releasing church planters and teams and people out of their church to plant, even in their city, in their region. Or it's Ralph Moore, who's one of those few leaders who you can count on your hand, who's actually still leading a level 5 movement out of the Hope Chapel. Because out of disciple making and planting 3 churches that planted 70, that today are 2,400 churches across the world. So that's what we're going after. And that's what my friends on this call today is that we're going after the 16% mission. The 16% mission is that we would see a tipping point of success of level 4 and level 5 churches, because sociologists tell us that when we get to that 16%, it becomes normative in a society, in a culture, and that's what we're looking for. And we believe some of you, as leaders who've been stuck in level 3, that's my story. I got stuck in the level 3 machine, and we want us to break through to be level 4 reproducing churches, level 5 multiplying churches. And we believe we can begin to see that number get to 16% as many of you, many of us lead networks who come together to plant churches together. So we're so excited that you're on here, and thank you, Patrick, for letting us contribute to this conversation.
Thanks, Jason. Give it up for Jason, guys. Well done. Thank you all very, very much. Love the work of Exponential. The level 5 thinking has been instrumental in my own ministry and how I think about the church, and super grateful for that. And what we're doing is we're going to start suggesting that networks might be a way to move the church into more level 5 territory. So a little bit more on that as we go, but Jason, thanks for setting that up for us. Team, you are more than welcome to use the chat feature to connect. And then there will be a time with a Q&A at the end of this call. And you are more than welcome to begin to enter your questions into that chat so that our speakers can speak to that at the end of this time together. But Jason, thanks again. I'm gonna switch right into Christ Together. Christ Together and my friend Will Plitt have done some amazing works around city. And if you have spent any time with Will and the team at Christ Together, you will know and you will hear and you will be challenged to think about collaboration. So Will, take it away, brother.
Yeah, thanks so much, Patrick. Jason, thank you for doing a great job leading us. And I think in a small way, Christ Together, NewThing, and Exponential wanted to model that we really believe there is more that we can do together than apart. So for those of you that I don't know, I serve as the executive director for Christ Together. And our heart is really to see the re-evangelization of North America through a unified church. And so we really exist to envision and convene the church of a city or region to reach their city. And we've been doing that in the US, in Canada, in 103 cities. And I'm just really grateful for the opportunity to share with you today.
Uh-oh. Are you all still with me? Is that Will? Of course. All right, I'll give Will another 10 seconds. Hopefully that Wi-Fi will kick in for him. If not, Dave Ferguson, I might switch out with you. And we'll see here in a moment. All right. Maybe one of my colleagues can help get Will back on. Let's give him just 30 more seconds to jump on. I'll stop sharing my screen here. Super grateful to be with all of you. While we're waiting for Will, let me do this then. I was going to wait to do this at the end. And if one of my colleagues can let me know if Will jumps back on and I can jump into there. If not, what I wanted to do, and I was going to wait for after Will's talk, but I wanted to launch an assessment. And I'm going to ask you to just take about 30 seconds and take this assessment. And again, after Will was done, I was going to do this, but I wanted to ask you, how are churches doing in your city, in your opinion, in collaborating? All right, so Will's going to talk about this. And then I wanted to talk about and ask you about your personal willingness to collaborate. Remember our thesis here is that we're doing church planting. We're grateful for that. There are tons of assets around church planting. But we're suggesting that the missing piece might be around collaboration. And we're having this summit with an eye on many of you who can lead these collaborative entities that are around cities or around networks to really engage in the conversation about moving the needle not only to 16%, but where we would see a majority of churches in North America at 4 or 5, level 4 or 5, and maybe even beyond. Maybe there's a level 6. Maybe Jason and the team can work on that. But as you can see, and this is and team, I'm just learning with you. My posture here is as a learner. One of the things that I've learned as a kind of an organizational leader that is here to serve the church is that there's a willingness to collaborate. But then there's kind of like this moment of, oh, what's next? And so part of what we want to do here is talk about what's next. So good news is that many of you want to and see yourself as collaborating with other churches in your city or your region. The bad news is, and I suspected, that it's not happening a lot. And we have some opportunity there, and thus the reason for this this conversation. So looks like
Patrick,
my friend Will is back. Go ahead. Somebody was saying something?
Yeah, I'm back. I have no idea what happened. My apologies.
That's all right. We made total fun of you, but you started the gas
Expect nothing
generator.
less.
I'm just doing the poll, Will. Give me 1 second. I just wanted to make sure that everybody had the chance to look at the poll. We will send you results, but let's return to Will. And you're going to have some chances to talk about this team in your breakout rooms in just a moment. Thanks for bearing with us with regards to technology. And Will, unfortunately, I can only give you 10 minutes now. But if you can take it from here, brother.
That's great. Thanks, Zoom, for rudely interrupting me. And back to your scheduled programming. Okay. So what I was saying is that it's got to be a shift away from level 3 to level 4 living and thinking, and that's going to require collaborating for the shared outcome of gospel saturation. That's going to require multiplying at every level as a missional necessity for the full evangelization of a people and a place. So here's the reality that all of us are contending with here in North America, that as a whole, we are currently presiding over the greatest decline of Christianity across our nation on our watch. And I don't say that to sound disparaging, but rather there's great opportunity for us to chart a new path. And so what I want to do is really spend my time talking about a shift in our paradigm and in our scorecards around this statement, that the fulfillment and completion of the Great Commission necessitates the great collaboration. And some of you on this call have experienced a shift in your paradigm. And when you experience that, it will lead to a new scorecard for how we begin to measure success. So here's what I want to propose today, for the sake of time and for our conversation, that I want to propose that the North American church does not have an app problem. It has an OS problem. And another way that we talk about that at Christ Together is that we don't have a strategy problem. If strategy could have fixed everything that's wrong or broken with the church in North America, it would have done so because of the access that we have. But rather, we have a culture problem. So how do we take time to address an unhealthy culture or confront a broken or incomplete operating system? So about 14 years ago, my vision and operating system was majorly disrupted by a question that I had heard from a missiologist by the name of Dwight Smith. And the question was this: has God called you to plant a church, or has he called you to reach a geography? And that was a very, it was a highly confronting question. And it calls me to ask the question, could I say I was winning if my church grew, but at the same time, my city became more lost and broken year after year after year. And here was the realization, and this is kind of the way we talk about it at CT, that, and this really, I think, describes kind of our explanation of level 3, thinking and living, that the church is largely sits on a collecting OS. That the church, as you see in the middle, is primarily viewed as a place, a program, and a property where we experience church inside of those walls. And if the OS of the church is always about collecting, it'll always be about protecting our assets. It'll always be about viewing other churches as competitors. And it will always be about building organization. And this has kind of been the prevailing model that has dominated our landscape, that prevents us from going to level 4 and 5 and into movemental and to reaching a geography. And it's really funded, or not funded, fueled rather, by self-preservation. And self-preservation is always asking the question, what am I afraid to lose? So what we're saying is that what if the church wasn't sitting on the collecting OS, but rather on a mobilizing OS? That we moved away from a very priestly model to the releasing of the priesthood of all believers. That the church, the people of God, saved by Jesus, empowered by the Holy Spirit, sent on mission, that if that was the case, then it would always be about releasing instead of protecting. It would always be viewed as, if we're going to take responsibility for geography, we have to collaborate, not compete. And then it would always have to go back to the core of the church of making and mobilizing and multiplying disciple makers. So with a collecting OS, the vision for me was, how do I grow my church through addition? But from the question that I heard, if it was to reach a geography, then it meant the mission was bigger than any one church. And I also needed a bigger vision than simply growing a bigger and better church. So here's what it meant. It meant two things. One, that when Jesus gives us the last kind of Great Commission passage in Acts 1:8, when he talks about, and you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and all Judea and Samaria to the ends of the earth. What if the mission of every one of our churches was this slide that you're seeing? What if it was gospel saturation? What if it was about taking personal responsibility first in our Jerusalem and then out to the ends of the earth? And the way that we talk about gospel saturation is the church of a geography taking responsibility for the lostness to ensure that every man, woman, and child has repeated access and opportunity to the good news. It's ultimately asking the question, what would it take for every person to know at least one person whose life is being changed by Jesus? What if this was the mission of every church in my geography? So if God is asking us to take responsibility for a geography, then it meant that no one church, no matter how large or influential, could ever reach a geography. Secondly, here's what it meant. It meant that if the shared conviction was the evangelization of a people in a place, then it meant collaboration with other churches was not just a nicety, but it was a necessity. When we go to the prayer of Jesus in the last portion of his prayer, in the high priestly prayer, what does Jesus ask the Father for? He asked the Father for oneness, which is to reflect the triune God. Why does Jesus, which he could have asked for anything, why does he ask for oneness? And he tells us why. He says, so that the world might know and believe that Jesus is the Son of God. What we believed early on with Christ Together, when we were looking at cities and churches and cities, that we believed that this had become the missing apologetic for our cities. Namely, how would the lost people of our city, our county, our town, our region know that Jesus is divine by the way that the church is united. It meant that if Jesus were to write a letter to the church of my city, would he address it to simply my church, or would he address it to the church of our city? Much like how Paul did with his epistles, and much like Jesus does in Revelation when he addresses the 7 churches. And this was a very convicting piece for me, because if Jesus has only one bride, why had I modeled to a watching world that Jesus had multiple brides? It meant that I had to not only view myself as the pastor of a church in my city, but I also had to view myself as a pastor of the church in my city. So with these shifts in our OS and in our paradigm toward gospel saturation and collaboration, it meant that over time, our scorecards for how the churches measure success would need to begin to reflect these shifts that you see. That if we're talking about reaching every man, woman, and child, we would have to mobilize each man, woman, and child to live as sent missionaries. We have to celebrate that over collection. We would have to celebrate and emphasize transformation, creating a disciple-making culture over simply attendance on Sunday. We would have to shift away from competition to collaboration if we have any hope of ever reaching a geography. And we would have to get back to multiplying at every level, disciples, leaders, churches, over simply adding a few more people. And so the last thing I'll say on kind of shifts and scorecard on this, Patrick, go to that ROS slide. Go to up there. Yeah, there you go. Thank you, brother. It meant that, like, if we're talking about movement in a place, and you look at movement throughout history, there's some common denominators. And so when the paradigm begins to shift our posture, our thinking that lead to new practices, it means that when God moves in the world, he moves through all his people. And we have built a church model that's heavily dependent on the few professionals. But how do we mobilize all of God's people? It means that we're going to have to be leaders who value and cherish the equipping of others as our first priority, even more so than the exercising of our gifts. And thirdly, that we were going to have to get back to disciples and churches that multiply. So in closing, when gospel saturation becomes the shared outcome of a church in a region, it means that when all the churches lean into this, imagine all the ships in the harbor, that all the ships in the harbor rise when the tide is gospel saturation. So let me end there before Zoom cuts me off again, or Patrick cuts me off, whichever one was.
Well done, Will. Thank you,
Thank you,
brother.
brother. Thank you, guys.
Give it up for Will, team. Give it up for Will. Good job, man. Good job. One of the things that Will's helped me really understand in a deep way is this idea of this idea of a city church, which gets in a whole bunch of stuff, right? Ecclesiology, leadership, resources, etc., etc. But Will's very focused on it. God's called him to be a spokesperson for this, and Christ Together are doing some amazing things, and we couldn't do this without them. So Will, hats off to you guys and the team for calling us to sometimes just not settling for the good, but really driving towards the great that Jesus has for us. And it's disruptive sometimes, and I appreciate your posture towards it. So, team, what you're seeing here is this emphasis on collaboration, this emphasis on connection. And obviously, this is all based on the life of Jesus. You're all preachers and theologians, so you don't need me to belabor that point. But we have a real opportunity here as the church. So what I want to do next is I want to give you a few moments to connect with some others. You've been hearing some great speakers. I'm gonna break you into some Zoom rooms, and what we've done is we have assigned some rooms based on your geographic context. And so you're going to have an opportunity to connect with some people. Maybe you know them, maybe you don't. And there's going to be a short, sharp conversation. We're going to give you about 15 minutes for this conversation, maybe just a hair less, so that we can keep this thing moving for you. And we're going to ask you just to have a couple of questions as we're thinking about this conversation, because I frankly want to give you an opportunity to kind of wrestle with this a bit. So, what did you hear that stood out to you? Maybe this is a familiar conversation. Maybe you've heard it before. My guess is there's something new every time. So, what is this that has stood out to you? And here's my challenge, team. And here's what I think you're starting to feel, hopefully, in this summit. Content is great. It's not going to change a darn thing. We need to get after it. We need to change paradigms. We need to look at scorecards. We need to challenge ourselves in different and new ways. So I'm going to ask you to share, what are you going to do about it? Here's what hit me. Here's what I'm going to do about it. And I'm just going to keep open about that. And I'm going to dismiss you into some Zoom rooms for about 12 minutes to do it. And then when you come back, Dave Ferguson, who is our lead visionary of NewThing and also CEO of Exponential, president of Exponential, excuse me, is going to talk about networks. And that is going to drive us to the second part of our conversation today, because we're going to be asking you to take some action. So here's an opportunity to reflect, to connect, and then we'll come back and we're going to be taking some action as we continue our summit. So Sarah, could you help us get into those Zoom rooms right now?
that is, John 17 is a missional text. It's a missional text. And the Jesus mission will not be fully accomplished until we do all three of things. We go and we love and we do it together. And I believe, and I'm increasingly have this conviction, that a multiplying network of churches is one of the best expressions to actually accomplish the great collaboration and the Jesus mission. And I've had the privilege, both sometimes up close and also from a distance, to see what happens when you invest yourself fully in the mission of going, loving, and doing it together. This picture here is a picture, some are old, some are newer, of the Chicago movement in our city. And to tell a little bit of the story, just as quick as I can, at Community, our first church plant, more than 20 years ago now, was actually in Denver. And we had 35 folks from our church that sold their homes, got new jobs, transferred schools, and went out there and planted a brand new church. And the church plant went so well, we did another one the next year in Southern California. We had about a dozen people that moved from Chicago to Southern California. And then the next year, we had about 15 people that moved to Detroit. And the next year, we had people who moved to New York, the year after that, Boston, and then Knoxville. And we were just continued to be friends on mission. And eventually, this grew to about 10 churches. And we were actually in this building that I'm in right now for kind of just brought all 10 churches together. And I was having a hard time connecting with all the leaders for these churches we planted. And I remember it was almost spontaneous. It kind of seemed a little bit obvious. I said, well, I'll tell you what, why don't we just make 2 smaller networks? And I said, we'll call this Dave's network because Dave was going to be the network leader. And we'll call this Greg's network because Greg was going to be the network leader. And we started these 2 other networks. And all of a sudden, we went from not just reproducing churches, but we also started reproducing these small church planting networks. And what we began to see happen over the next 3 years was all of a sudden we went from about a dozen churches to 36 churches, then to 64, then to 127. And I remember I was at an exponential event in Houston. We had a guy named Sam Stevens, who was the president in India Gospel League, speaking. And so I'm explaining to him, hey, we're not just reproducing church, but also these networks. And I remember him looking at me like it was obvious, because, I mean, Sam's a guy who eventually, under his leadership, they planted over 100,000 churches. And I remember he said this to me. He just said, Dave, networks are the backbone to movement. Networks are the backbone to movement. And we were backstage, and he explained, yeah, here's what we do. Once a month, we bring all our church planners together in these little networks. We have them share a meal. We have them share their goals, and we give them some centralized training. And so, like, I'm taking this all in, right? Because obviously this guy knows a lot more about it than I do. And so one of the things we started doing then is we said, hey, when your network comes together, here's what a network does. The N stands for numbers. Just review your goals together. What are your goals for multiplying? Whether it's disciples or leaders or churches or even another network, what are your goals? Your numbers. Then eat together, because eating is the best way to move kind of an acquaintance to a friendship. And great things happen when you become friends on mission. And then the T is training. We would give them some centralized training that they could absolutely leave better leaders than they came. So we just kind of began to do what Sam Stevens did. And we began to discover the power of church planting networks and really this great collaboration. And if we look over our shoulder, just by God's grace through NewThing, I mean, here's some numbers that show you the number of churches we were able to train in 2023, the number of people we were able to train, the number of countries we were in, the number of churches planted, and the number of networks. And we just feel grateful that God's let us be a part of something like this. Now, we've been doing this for a few years now, and actually Patrick and I wrote a book for Exponential called Together, the Great Collaboration. We outlined about 10 different benefits of networks, but I want to give you the top 3 real quick. Top 3, and I call these 3 ways that church planting networks create movement. I think one benefit is what I just call the results benefit. See, networks focus on clear outcomes. Networks focus on clear outcomes. When we decide to answer to other people, and not do it on our own, we become accountable. And accountability, when it's our own idea, gets results. I mean, it's why we talk to a counselor to get results. It's why we hire an executive coach to get results. It's what makes a personal trainer so invaluable. It gets results. I think this is fascinating. This information from the American Society of Training and Development. They actually tell us that if you want to accomplish something, when you create a goal, you'll accomplish it 10% of the time just by creating a goal. Well, if you add a date to it, you'll accomplish it 40% of the time. If you actually put a plan together to how to achieve the goal, you'll accomplish it 50% of the time. But then it adds this here. If you make an accountability appointment with a person to whom you're committed, you'll accomplish it 95% of the time. And that's what networks can do. So that's the first benefit, I think, is really the results benefit. The second is a relational benefit. In a little bit here, you're going to hear two really great case studies. And I want you to pay attention when we hear these case studies, because what you're going to hear is underneath it all are a group of people who are starting to become friends. They're locking arms, and really enjoying being together. And I'm telling you, don't undersell this. The soft stuff of friendship that creates trust and love, it also creates results. But in addition to results, okay, these friends on mission, this goes back to a book that Warren Bird and Ed Stetzer wrote. They gave us this. They said that you will see 125% increase in a church planter's survival if they meet in a peer-to-peer group. So not only does it get results, but it also actually contributes to the health of the church planter or the pastor or the church leader that's in these networks. It does both things, more and better. Let me give you a third benefit. Third benefit, networks are all about God's kingdom. And I think that's been like a sub-theme throughout our time together here. And it's not about individual castles. If you go back, I mean, when we first went multi-site at Community, I got so fired up about multi-site. I had this dream. We were gonna start 200 locations. Okay, 200 locations, partially inspired by the Spirit, but also encouraged by a very large ego. 200 locations. Well, the possibility of that castle built by Dave Ferguson had to become crumbling down so we could focus on building God's kingdom. And now in Chicago, and this is really thanks to the efforts of John Ferguson, Eric Metcalf, and the whole team, we have 10 networks there that have helped plant 65 churches in the last 5 years. And I have no doubt in the next 5 years, we'll probably hit or even surpass that 200 church plant that I thought maybe we could somehow do on our own. What's really fun, even in Chicago, recently, we talked about this collaboration. I was thinking about this, Will, when you were talking. We had one of our networks had an upwardly mobile urban reformed church and a Southside African-American covenant church and a suburban mega multi-site church. All of them contribute financially to start a new church on the far north side of the city. And I love that kind of collaboration. And that's one of the benefits there. Who gets the credit in that? Not any individual's castle, but God's kingdom. God's kingdom. Let me throw a picture up here. This is kind of just to encourage you and for some inspiration. If you know who that is, go ahead and type that in the chat. If you know who that is, type that in the chat. I know some of you are going to know who this is. Many of you will not. There we go. Nicely done, Daniel. Thank you. I knew Rodrigo would get it. That's Kipchoge, Eliud Kipchoge. Kipchoge is without a doubt the greatest distance runner I think we've seen in our lifetime. Now, what's going on in this picture? What's going on in this picture is the very best distance runners in all the world are coming together to do something that's never been done before. See, it was always thought that the marathon, 26.2 miles, could never be run in less than 2 hours, that was impossible. It was like this unbreakable barrier to run a marathon in less than 2 hours, that the human body was not actually capable of doing it. Even Kipchoge couldn't do it. And this guy's won everything. He won the London Marathon 4 times. He won the Berlin Marathon 3 times. He won the Chicago, Tokyo, marathon. He won the gold medal in 2016 and 2020. In fact, he once ran a marathon in 2 hours, 1 minute, and 36 seconds, but could never break the 2-hour barrier until somebody had this idea. And the idea was this: what if, and think about what we've been talking about today, what if we brought together the most elite runners in the world, not to compete against each other, but to collaborate? And what if instead of each of them, look at those runners in the back, each of them trying to win, what if we had them work together and we had each of them run just a section of the marathon, not the whole marathon, so that they could run with Kipchoge and cheer on Kipchoge. They could encourage Kipchoge. They could pace Kipchoge. Maybe the theory was maybe together they could do something that once seemed impossible. And I love this picture, and you can tell I love telling this story. And the reason I love this picture, because this is the end of 26.2 miles, a marathon, where he crosses the finish line, all right, in 1 hour, 59 minutes, and 40 seconds. And behind him, celebrating, are the greatest runners in the world. They're not competing, they're celebrating, because they all came together to do something that had never been done before. And to me, that's the power of a church planting network. Doing something together that we thought couldn't be done. So I'll go back to that one stat that I think is so compelling for me. Again, Warren Bird, probably the best researcher we have, he says this: sitting out there right now are 43% of all the church planters who started church in the last 5 years. As they look into the future, they say part of their vision for the future is a multiplying network of churches. They're waiting for us to kind of come alongside them and show them how to do this and say that it's actually possible and cheer them on and pace them. And as my mentor, Bob Buford said, he said, hey, work with the receptive and work with what's trying to happen. And to me, I'm super encouraged by this, because I think a multiplying church planting networks, these are trying to happen. And I love that we're coming together like this, because I think this is the opportunity for us to go to work together on it. All right. Thanks, team.
Hey, thanks, Dave. Thanks. Give it up for Dave Ferguson. Love it. And team, keep in mind, what we're trying to do is create this idea of a funnel in your head. To be honest, right? This idea that we are not going to get to level 5 on our own. There's no such thing as getting to level 5 without collaboration. This idea that Will presented around gospel saturation, that the big bogey, why we're in the game, is not to build our own thing, but to build and to advance God's kingdom. And you and I are stewards, and the organizations we represent are stewards. And our leadership resources and capacities, we are mere stewards. We are here because of the leaders who have gone before us. We are here for such a short time as this. And we will be seeding the future one way or the other. That's without equivocation. The question is, what are we seeding the future with? And so what I want to do is thank all of my friends on mission. We wanted to do this collaboratively. By the way, collaboration is not easy. It's fun, it's fruitful, but it's messy, because we are people, and people are generally messy. But I want to say thank you to my friends who have all spoken here today and challenged us and thinking about this with me. But let's hear about how this is actually working and where it's actually happening. So I've invited my colleague, Eric Metcalf, to lead a conversation with two of our dear friends on mission. The first is with Rodrigo Cano, who is not only representing community and NewThing, but doing an amazing amount of work around microchurch networks throughout the world. And Rodrigo and I had the opportunity to go to Cuba last year. I'll let him talk about that if he's interested. But even in Cuba, there's conversations going on around collaboration. And so, Eric, happy birthday. Yes, it is Eric Metcalf's birthday, so give him a shout out for that. And Eric, take it away with Rodrigo, please.
Yeah, all right, fun. Hey, this is exciting stuff. Thanks for letting me jump in the conversation here. Thrilling. And yes, it is my birthday, 49 years old. I did 49 push-ups today. I really did, just to prove that I'm not old. 49, what's that? That's nothing. That's nothing. Rodrigo and I decided to bring the meanest looking mustaches to this part of the Zoom conversation. Sorry, Dave. I don't know. It might be a competition. We should. Yeah, thanks for giving us this opportunity, Patrick. I mean, just thrilled to be able to interview and spend some time with these leaders. Rodrigo is just a wonderful friend and passionate about church multiplication. He and I served together here in Chicagoland, as Dave shared, and I just put in the chat the link to what we're doing here in Chicagoland in the last 5 years. We've been able to see about 65 new churches started, with about 65 churches aligned in 10 different networks that are working together to plant churches together. If you remember, a network is a cluster of churches, maybe like 4 to 6 churches that are working together to start churches together. Sometimes we think of it as like a small group for pastors that are focused on church multiplication. And we've just seen a lot of really incredible things happen in a very short period of time. And Rodrigo serves on that team, but also has a variety of hats. And so, Rodrigo, just give them a quick introduction of yourself and the different roles that you play within NewThing and at the church you're at.
Yeah, no, thank you, everyone. This is a great opportunity, so thank you for having me here. So yeah, I mean, some of the roles like Eric and Patrick were saying, I get the privilege to serve the local church at one of our community locations here in Aurora, Illinois. So Aurora is the second largest city of Illinois. I always say this, about 100,000 people still don't know Christ, or they still need to find their way back to God, just in the city of Aurora, And so there's a lot of need there. Also, I serve in the NewThing team, and I love what God is doing, opening many doors in terms of what God is doing in Chicagoland area. If you know Chicago, Chicago is super diverse. There's a lot of diversity, and there's a lot of great things that are wanting to happen. Using that analogy, there's a lot of things that want to happen, and we get to be part of that. I also get to work with micro churches, and so our effort to start micro churches through Community Christian Church, but also now in collaboration with NewThing and what God is doing in the Chicagoland area and all around the globe. I mean, by God's grace, God has opened many, 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 many doors in places like Uganda, in India, in Kenya, in Cuba, in the United States. I mean, Pakistan. God has been so grateful. And then obviously here in the Chicagoland area, in Wisconsin area. And so, yeah, we're super excited. I'm excited to share what God is doing and how God is using networks to collaborate and to do more. Yeah, for sure.
Awesome, Rodrigo. Thanks for sharing that. And friends, if you heard, he's got multiple hats that he's wearing. He's serving at the local church. He's serving through NewThing at the local church level here at Community Christian Church here in Chicagoland. Again, both where Rodrigo and I live. You're leading a location of community. You're also spearheading the micro church initiative on behalf of Community Christian Church. But the hat we want to talk about today, if we could, and certainly maybe we'll go to the other roles that you play as well, is leading a local network. And this is something that you've chosen to do, where you tithe your time and you volunteer to lead a network for your friends on mission. Can you talk a little bit about that network? Maybe just a quick profile of the churches that are engaged in that, and maybe a possible church planting project that you guys have done over the last 12 to 18 months together. Is that okay?
Yeah, definitely. So just a little background, a little story. Like when I'm leading a church here, and the church that we're leading, it's in English, and God is doing some amazing things here. But Aurora is 42% Hispanic, and so it's a high population of Hispanic people here, and a lot of them don't speak English, or they speak Spanish. And so I was looking at the need. I started to knock on some doors and just ask some questions to some other pastors who have been here for a little while, longer than me. And they were all saying the same thing, especially the Hispanic pastors were saying, we feel alone. We feel like we don't have no friends. Some of our churches see us as competition, all of those things that we've heard in the past. And so God put it in my heart to start a network of Hispanic pastors here in Aurora, Illinois. And just to kind of like bring unity, but also for us to dream together and for us to collaborate together. Once again, 100,000 people, that's a lot of people. Not a single church can reach out to those 100,000 people. And so we've been gathering together, and it's very diverse what you see in terms of theological background. So we have a Lutheran church, we have an Anglican church working with us. We have one pastor who is part of a mega church. And then we have some other pastors who are non-denominational and Pentecostal churches. And so coming together, and we're just dreaming together, working together. And out of that, a few months ago, well, almost a year ago, one of our friends said, like, hey, I feel God is calling me to plant a church. Would you help me? And, what are some of the ways that you can help me? And so like, well, yeah, of course we can help you. So, some of the ways that we have helped him plant the church is, one is sending some people, say like, hey, we have some people that we can send you. And so we're going to send you. And it's not a lot. I mean, most of our churches are small. And so, send maybe a couple of families. We have another church that said like, no, we have money and we have some money that we want to give you. And so we gave him some money in terms of, just to help him get situated and get
Awesome.
going. And then, we say like, well, we would have money or people, we have influence, and we want to use our influence to platform you and to lend you a platform so that you can be successful. And so we've been doing that, putting in practice what we teach in terms of the resources that we can share with other people. And so, yeah, it's been pretty cool to see this one church, emerge out of that. And in fact, there was a season where the pastor had to go to Florida for a few months, personal stuff. But it was pretty cool because one of the churches as part of the network said, well, send your people here and send the people there. Now the pastor is back, and the church that has housed them is like, they're your people. And now, we're sending your people back, but not only your people back, but we're sending more people to you, which is pretty cool to
So
see
great.
operation in that end. And just one quick story.
Please.
Past Sunday, not this past Sunday, but the Sunday before, we were at church and we were having a great time. And I saw a Hispanic couple come in and just say hi to them, what brought you here? And this was their answer. I said, like, we've been knocking at doors around Aurora and nobody has helped us. We're trying to plant a church and we were told that you and your church helps plant churches. Will you help us plant
Come
a church?
on.
And we're like, of course, we want to help you plant the church. So that's another project that we're bringing together. They're bringing to
Praise
the whole
God.
and say, hey, we're gonna, we have this opportunity. Somebody knocking at our door and saying, we want to plant the church, and we heard that you guys do that. So I mean, it's pretty amazing what God is doing through the network.
That's a wonderful testimony, Rodrigo, of kingdom over castle kind of leadership and how it creates a culture. And maybe the word gets out and leaders knock on your door and they're like, hey, I hear you get excited about these kinds of things. And the fact that God had maybe even just prepared a way for that, just in a way that you couldn't have done yourself.
Yeah.
And, I don't know, everybody, if you notice the alliterations that Rodrigo was using, like a very good pastor would, the people, pennies, and platform and prayer, just the fact that your network is working together to send church planters out. Friends, for sake of time and to keep things kind of moving, and we wanted this to be very interactive and quick anyway, we're going to be closing our time with Rodrigo. But Rodrigo, before you hop off, my friend, could you just give us a word of encouragement, maybe something you might say to our friends who are thinking about starting a network or joining a network?
I mean, you heard the benefits. God is doing some amazing things through the networks, and we strongly believe networks are the backbone for movement, and God is doing some amazing things. And this is my added 2 cents to the whole conversation. When you look around your neighborhoods and you look around what God is doing in your cities, look for the diversity of your city. Make sure that your networks don't look like you. Make sure that you're looking at what God is doing through the different diversity that God is bringing that they're already in your cities. They're already in your cities. And obviously, as a Hispanic, they said the statistics show that by 2050, probably the majority of people are Hispanics, and not all are first language, Spanish first language. Like, there's a lot of Latinos that are being born now in the United States, and there's so much power. There's so much things that God can do through our Latino and Hispanic brothers and sisters. But think and just look at the diversity. God is already doing something in your city, and God has already brought the diversity into your city. So let's be open to collaborate beyond, our own culture.
Amen.
And embrace people. Yeah.
Thank you, Rodrigo. Thank you for your leadership in that. Guys, let's give it up for Rodrigo. Let's thank him. Thank you, sir. We're going to go ahead and interview and move on to Chad Clarkson, who is with HCPN, the Houston Church Planting Network. If you've been studying citywide movements and citywide collaborative efforts around church multiplication for very long, you will know that Chad and team are one of the best in the country. And so we're super thankful to have them join us on this call. What's up, Chad? Hey, I love your background. What is this? Is this a picture? Is it?
No, I'm at a collaboration workspace and it's Space City. So the room's called Space City. So went with the background.
Really?
So, yeah. Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Happy birthday, by the way.
Thank you, sir. That's right. Come on. I appreciate that. Well, Chad, if you could just kind of introduce yourself, give us the many hats that you wear, some of the incredible outcomes as you guys have been working together in Houston, and then we'll jump into a few more questions after that. Thanks, brother.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Great to be here. I appreciate today. Chad Clarkson, I'm in Houston, Texas, from the Midwest, but married a Texan. So been here for the last couple decades. Was church planting pastor at a church close to NASA. And several years back, I transitioned to running point for the Houston Church Planting Network, which is really, we just say it's a collaborative movement of church planting churches that are really hoping to saturate the city with the gospel of Jesus in our lifetime. That's what we're dreaming about now. A quick backstory, we've been at it a while. We started in 2010, was actually the first time we gathered, really came out of a local church vision, kind of an Acts 1:8 type thing. For Houston, it really became, all right, that's our Judea, Samaria. How do we get after that? And the realization of our church was, all right, one church, well, not only one church, but one church, one denomination, one network, can't get that task done by themselves. So we have to work together, right? So that started a first gathering we did where we brought a handful of pastors together and just kind of shared the vision. And it wasn't like, hey, here's our strategic plan of the Houston Church Planting Network. It was like, all right, we want to be about Houston. We want to be about church planting. And we want to function as a network. So it took some years to kind of get a little momentum going, but we've been at it now for probably 13 or 14 years. I would say over the time, the levers we've continued to pull are we gather together. I think that's a key component. Again, it goes back to the relationship side of things. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, we just had Ed Stetzer here for our 118th gathering. So that gives you a little idea. We've been at it a while. We usually try to meet about 9 to 10 times a year. So we gather together, we train together. So we really want to invest in church planters, those kind of getting ready to plant, so really working all the farm system stuff, those getting ready to launch, and then post stuff. And a lot of that is collaborative. So we try to, really give the planters the best the city has to offer in terms of training. So expose them to a lot of different models, a lot of different pastors, et cetera. And then we say the third lever is we're trying to facilitate collaboration at every turn, maybe between networks, between different denominations, between churches, all of that stuff. We're trying to facilitate that. So that's a little bit about HCPN.
That's quite a bit of amazing activity. Really just hearing all the work that you guys have done in such a short period of time. Exciting too. You said you had Ed there recently, or he's planning to be your next gathering?
He was here a couple of weeks ago. So it was our kind of a kickoff for our fall gathering. We do a big, we'll meet, again, about 9 times a year, do something different. So Ed did our first gathering of the fall.
And that's awesome. He was here in Chicago for a hot minute, and we became pretty decent friends, just me personally, because the church I planted was across the street for him in the shadow of Moody Church when he was the interim pastor there. So just, again, me personally, just talking about Ed, he's a wonderful leader.
It seems like cool. He's everywhere. So
that's definitely true. I tell you what, if you wouldn't mind, maybe share a testimony that you look back and you're going, you know what, like this was only God could have done this, as you saw either collaboration of churches or an outcome of a new church planting project. Like what kind of testimony where you're just like, God totally did this, and this has been something I've been excited to be a part of, and here's why?
Yeah, I mean, as I look at the past, several years, I think there's been several. I think there's probably a few of those kind of milestones where you just sensed, all right, it's probably about 4 years in actually, where we began to get a sense, all right, the Spirit's up to something, where he just began striking a match as we're talking to different pastors across the city, and just something began to change. We've been running the same playbook, but something began to change. And I think, it's like Willard talks about, right? It's that long obedience in the same direction. So although we've had a few key markers, it's like, all right, let's just keep pushing the flywheel of collaboration, of multiplication. And that's where we've been. And I think the thing that I think probably most excited about right now is not so much Houston, because I think about Houston, I kind of compare it to when we started. I picture almost like when you start to boil water, right? Like you turn on the pot, and it takes a while for any activity, and then you get excited when you see that first bubble come up, and that's kind of what I felt about Houston. And then you kind of see a couple others of cities. Now, I mean, 15 years in, it seems like we're getting a lot of calls. I know just hearing just from this call already, it's like it feels like the pot is boiling. It's like you're seeing these bubbles begin to kind of percolate everywhere, and it's just it's exciting. And I sense that, again, going back to what is God trying to do. I think this is it, seeing them here in the United States and all around the world.
That's good, brother. I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing that. And just even kind of looking ahead and forecasting and identifying that the pot is boiling. There are, seems people are more open now than ever to collaborate and explore what might look like to work together. What have been any kind of like challenges with the few minutes we got left here, like a challenge that you've encountered or a challenge that you're currently encountering that you're trying to like crack the code on from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always growth dynamics. So when you start off with, that's where one of the benefits of just having what Dave was talking about, like a small group of churches, as we've tried to expand. We're about 160 churches now, trying to grow that. So trying to work with kind of as you bring on new partners, there's always new challenges for that, right? Because you want them to feel engaged. So kind of the on ramps. We talk a lot about, in churches, we probably studied size dynamics. What's it look like in a plant? What's it look like a mid-size? As it grows, there's different church size dynamics. And I'm sensing the same thing in networks, just as they tend to grow. What are some of the obstacles at certain places, barriers? How do we get past that? We're processing right now. We're really trying to move towards decentralization in Houston. Houston's 10,000 square miles. If we're going to get after saturation, we believe we got to see decentralization. To see that become a reality. So we're really working on that right now. So that's probably one of the obstacles. One of the questions I often get is like, about the theological questions, but we've been at this like a long time. And I think I can count on one hand the number of questions I've got related to theology. Because it goes back to, again, what Dave was saying about relationships and the power of relationships, that when relationships are strong, I mean, you just work past those things. I mean, I think disunity doesn't arise out of a difference of doctrine, but really a lack of love. And as you're building relationships with people and know them and working towards mission together, it's like, all right, those theological differences, yeah, you may disagree, but it's like, all right, we're running the same, we're in the same harbor that Will talked about.
Did somebody write that last one down? I want to see that in the chat. Disunity doesn't happen because of what? Say it again.
Yeah, that's so good. Please.
Yeah, because of a difference of doctrine, but really a lack of love.
Wow.
So yeah, so over the years, it's like, hey, this is what we want to do. And so that's what I encourage as cities are getting started. We talk about, all right, what are the two keys for collaboration? We talk about like the two wings of the airplane, right? So it's one wing is mission. It goes back to what we've been talking about. It's gospel saturation. It's every man, woman, and child. It's all right. It's our map. It's like, all right, here's our map of Houston or map of fill in your city. We talk about missional people. Missional churches have maps. So we're about that. We want to get after the lostness of the geography. So it's kind of connecting on that mission. And contextualization lends itself to that mission. If you're in the same geography, I mean, you got such an advantage. And then the other side of the airplane, the other wing is relationships, right? It's that relationships of trust. People come to our gatherings now, and it feels like a family gathering to them as they're coming to the gatherings, because it's pastors across the city that they know, they love, and they're cheering on because they realize it's not just about their church, it's about the city.
Hey, Chad, this has been awesome. We are right at the time that we committed ourselves to, but I'm going to give you 10 seconds. One word of encouragement or challenge to this group.
Yeah, I mean, I said stay at it. Yeah, for me, it's like when that kind of that vision of the great collaboration that Patrick was talking about, the John 17. It's like I feel like when the Spirit grabs you with that, it's something you can't let go of. You can't opt out. When you get that, it's like, all right, this is what I'm going to journey for, and it's not going to happen overnight, right? It's going to take a while to see anything fruitful. But I think my encouragement would be just keep persevering.
Long obedience in the same direction. Thank you, Chad, for being a witness. Thanks for this. Everybody, let's show our appreciation to Chad.
Yeah,
Thank you, brother.
Chad. Wow. Great
Houston
stuff.
Church Planting Network. Big fans. Patrick, hand it back to you.
Yep, please.
All right. Peace.
Thanks,
Shalom.
Eric. Thanks, Chad. Thanks, Rodrigo. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Jason. And thank you to Will. I also want to say thank you to the whole team. So here's the deal now, team. You guys have heard from some of our friends and colleagues. You've heard, and I hoped, been challenged to think about this idea of the great collaboration. And now you have an opportunity right here, right now, in this moment. You have an opportunity to push away from this desk, finish your day, and say, wasn't that awesome? Boy. And then nothing happens. And man, that would be sad. That'd be sad. Because my sense is all of you have responded to this. And once again, we hope that this is the first of several conversations in the future where these organizations are going to be working together. But my friends, I'm tired of hearing about what could be. I'm distraught at what the state of the church is and what God has called us to be. And that's not being mean-spirited or not saying that we're not doing great things. God is doing great things. But I think Dave laid a great framework. We could be all about the commission. We could be all about the commandment, and we could still miss it. And one of the things that have been that I think we've been praying about as we've been setting up this conversation is frankly for all of you to come alongside all of you who may or may not clearly get it at the moment, who may have a lot of questions, a lot of concerns, but really come alongside leaders like you and support you and encourage you and cheerlead for you. And yes, maybe equip and train you in certain ways. And that's what these last couple of minutes are just going to be about. So I'm going to share one slide and then one survey online, and then we're just going to invite our speakers to, I'm going to just have a few minutes of Q&A with them. So be thinking about some questions that maybe arose during the conversations that you might want to ask the speakers or clarify, because man, I don't want to leave this just with what they've said. I would rather leave it with what you've said. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little survey up on the screen that we are going to do from Zoom. And I'll just do that as soon as I'm done with this slide. But the next step is very simple. Join a reproducing network catalyst that NewThing is offering. And so all you got to do is say, I want to be a network leader. I want to lead a cluster of 4 to 6 churches. I don't quite even know what that means yet, but I want to do it. I love leading in the local church. I love being a part of my city movement. I love and have been focused on my region, but I want to really lean into this space, this ecclesiology of network that Dave Ferguson and our speakers were sharing. And so NewThing, and that is with the blessing of our partners, we're going to offer you that reproducing networks catalyst for free. We got one kicking off in September, one kicking off in October, one kicking off in January. And all we're asking you to do is say yes to going through that experience. And if you say yes to it, we're going to follow up with you. And maybe by this time, 6 months from now, you're going to be leading and reproducing a network. And I know that's a big ask. And many of you will say, hey, sounds great, but I'm not ready for that yet. And so we want to have a conversation with you. Simple as that. We have 3 great organizations, throw in ACPN as a 4th, and we want to come alongside you and just have a conversation. And I've got some of my colleagues lined up. By the end of this, when you say, hey, I just want to talk to somebody about what this could look like in my context or learn a little bit more about it, we've got people from Exponential and from Christ Together and from NewThing who will gladly have that conversation with you. Because we look at you all as an emerging cadre of leaders, leaders who God is doing amazing things in, but we want to serve you as we serve the kingdom together. And maybe all of this is like, hey, this is great, I'm stacked, but I want to go to Exponential. Great, we want you at Exponential. Man, I'd really love to talk to Will and the team about what this Christ Together thing would look like in my city. Great, we want to do that. So right after this is over, you're going to, in the few hours ahead and then in the days ahead, you're going to get a follow-up from us. And the follow-up is going to be full of links and potential next steps for you. But I'm asking you all to pray and ask the Lord, do I have a role to play in this thing, this collaborative effort, whether it's in North America or my friends from the global church who are joining us? Again, we will be having a separate conversation with you. Here's the good news. Collaboration is trying to happen across the globe. Okay, so I'm going to put in this next, if I can figure this out, this is what I want you to do. If you'll just take a moment before we jump to time with our speakers, I want you to just enter your next step. My next step is to join one of these reproducing network catalysts that is being kicked off. Or my next step is I just want to talk to somebody more about this. And then we also want to know your region. So go ahead and put your region in there so that we can properly, if you're like in the southeast or in the south and you're in the Houston area, you need to be talking to Chad and the team at HCPN. If you're up in the Northeast, we've got stuff going on. If you're in Kansas City, if you're on the West Coast, we've got a lot of stuff going on. And good news, because this is a collaborative effort, we can put you in touch with more friends on mission who might be working in your area. And so one of the things that we also want to do is some of you represent denominations and organizations. That's great, because some of my colleagues and I are training denominations and organizations to help them start more networks intra-denominationally or intra-organizationally. One of the things I love about Chad, and when he's talking about HCPN, is 160 churches, right? We can all celebrate that. In Chicago, we have a lot of churches. But if we're not careful, we won't have any accountability when it comes to those churches working together. And so, and a network, this idea of 4 to 6 churches, remember what Sam Stevens said, that's the backbone of movement. That's at least one of the call to action that we want to see happen out of this collaborative opportunity. So I appreciate you filling out that form. We've got your contact info. You're going to get a follow-up email with some of the next steps, and that will be great. And we value what you're doing, and we value what you want to do and what the Lord might be calling you to do. But with that being said, I want to spend the last, 15 minutes or so here giving you the opportunity to ask questions. So that goes back to, maybe we can feature our speakers, Dave and Jason and Will and Chad and Rodrigo. And as we do that, I want to ask them the hard question, right? To maybe just get us started and then leave all the other questions up to you. Whoever wants to kind of answer this, Dave, Jason, Will, Chad, or Rodrigo, what are the barriers? What are the biggest barriers that you're all seeing to collaboration? And just, keep it short and sweet. 1 or 2 barriers that you see when it comes to collaboration. Because I sense this all sounds great until we actually try to do it. And you all are thinking and praying through this. What are some of the barriers that you're seeing?
I think from a high level, I would say it is the conversation we kind of started with, is the personal scorecard of the leader and the organizational scorecard of the local church. And Will, I'm sure there's probably tangible stories you have as you guys are working in cities to foster collaboration.
Yeah, I would say, and Chad hit this so well. Trust, like the mission to reach every man, woman, and child will only move as fast as relationships of trust, and you can't short circuit that. It takes time. Even Rodrigo, you alluded to that. And another thing too, it's just collaboration is a muscle that has not been exercised, and so it takes time to see the kingdom benefit of what we can do when we actually lock arms together for a mission bigger than just our church.
Love that, guys. So scorecard, we got a big barrier when it comes to different scorecards that we're all playing by. I love that. And Will, I like what you said. We're out of shape when it comes to collaboration. we gotta hit the gym and spend more time doing it. So I love that. Dave, Rodrigo, Chad, barriers that you see on a consistent level.
I think something that I consistently see is just the busyness of ministry. And so, and I think it has to do with what we're talking about, the scorecard and this idea of building my castle. So I got a bunch of things to do to build my castle rather than I'm going to try to build the kingdom. And so it's putting in perspective, am I being busy for the right things? Or,
Mm.
you know, or do we need to be busy together trying to reach out, you know, our the kingdom, our city, whatever God is calling us to do. So I think that that's one that I continuously see in our networks.
Chad, anything
Yeah,
to
I
add?
agree with that. The time thing, the busyness of pastors. I know Will has challenged us with Christ Together in Houston. It's like, what does it look like for pastors to tithe their time to the city? And so even our lead pastor, the church I'm at, like elders have said, hey, you get this amount of time to invest outside of our local church. So I think it may be harder for a church planter by themselves to do that, but it's something to consider.
So good. So
I
good.
think to reinforce that too, I'm gonna go back to what Jason, remember Jason showed us the magnet of level 3? And I think the magnet of level 3 has a pull on all of our time. So if you're a church pastor, it's like, what am I doing with my dollars? What am I doing with my minutes? And I mean, when you wake up in the morning, most of the times you're going like, okay, how do I get more leaders? How do I get more volunteers? How do I get more bucks so I can build this building or I can make payroll, that kind of stuff. And the magnet of that is pulling you so much back to 3 that it keeps you away from 4 or 5, which is where collaboration is. And it's tough, but I mean, I think it has to be a conscious determination, because if you don't invest that time, the relationships don't develop. The relationships don't develop, then nothing good happens.
So good. So good. Yeah, thanks, team. Questions from somebody else? Who else has a question? Don't be shy now. I'll start calling on people.
Praise the Lord. My name is Julius from Uganda.
Hey, welcome.
My question now to you, Patrick, you invited me to this. So now you're talking more about the US. Now, I heard about Rodrigo, about Uganda. I'm in Uganda. How can we networking together when I'm here in Uganda?
Of course, I mean, there's many different ways we can do that, but I would say let's start with connecting you and I. I'm gonna put my information in the chat, but we do have some connections in Uganda, in Kampala, south of Kampala. God is doing some amazing things there. And while we're supporting leaders from here with training and equipping and coaching, they need the local network. They need to be supported locally. And so to have indigenous people who are there, it's so important for us. So yeah, let's connect, and I would love to brainstorm some ideas on how to do that together. Amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, welcome. Glad you're here, my friend. Other questions for our speakers or for our case studies?
Yes.
Please.
Yes, that's Philip from Zimbabwe.
Hey, welcome.
Praise the Lord. This is a wonderful initiative, and I'm really impressed by this. I'm working with a network of churches whose focus is to plant churches in areas where the churches are needed most. So the issue is on the equal distribution of resources. Normally, the disparity in terms of resource base varies. Where resources are scarce, but manpower is plenty. People are ready to participate. How do we bridge the gap there?
So good. Welcome again, Philip. So glad, and blessings on your work in Zimbabwe. I've got a lot of ideas, but maybe one of our speakers can provide a quick answer or a quick insight for that. Resourcing in church planting and collaboration. What are you guys thinking?
Go for it, Patrick.
Yeah, well, we spent a lot of time thinking about this at NewThing, and Dave hit the top 3 advantages of a network. And this goes whether you're in Zimbabwe or in Zambia or in New York. I don't care. It's all the same as far as I'm concerned. These are all God's resources. We believe right? That the body has all it needs for the mission. Philip, I know we're specifically often impeded by financial resources. I get that. But within a network, when you are working as friends on mission and you are focused on the mission of Jesus and mutually submitting to one another and offering resources, there is a great plethora that can be accommodated then. So, for example, I know in Chicago, in one of our Chicagoland networks, there has been a church that has a building, another church that has a leader, another church that has some money. And so, what if we all come together collectively and say, here you are, Jesus, here are the collective resources of the church? Sometimes we get trapped into thinking what we can do when the question, the better question, is what can God do in and through us collectively? I know that sounds very aspirational. There's some very practical decisions that need to be made along the way, but it starts with coming around friends on mission around this collaborative effort where the kingdom is the cause, not castles. And I hope that translates well for you in your context. My friends, anything else to add when it comes to resourcing and sharing resources? Maybe from some of our city network friends?
I think, I mean, I think you don't have to have a lot. We become very resourceful. And so we're able to do a lot with little. And once again, it's this idea of I might not have a lot of one specific resource, but I have something else to offer. And we all bring it to the table, whatever that might be. Maybe it's, I know somebody that knows somebody that knows somebody, and that's all we bring to the table. But when we all do the same thing, then something happens. And that's what I love about networks, is that just the connections that happen and how we see God at work through those connections. So it's not one church bringing all of the resources saying, well, here, I'm the expert and you're going to do exactly what we tell you to do. But it's like, no, we've learned this and we have this and we have this other thing and we come together. That's the beauty of it.
It's great.
What challenge do you give them in Houston, Chad? The churches you're working with?
Resourcing side of things?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the context is different from Africa, but I mean, I agree with what Rodrigo was saying. It's like, what does it look like for multiple churches to be supporting a plant? And so like we've had some recent ones that they've got 40 plus churches that are financially supporting them or offering different things. And that's just a huge advantage because of the network. So, and plus it doesn't put the burden on one specific group, one specific church. It's like, all right, this isn't all about you. There's other people coming along. And it also forces the church planter to hustle. Sometimes I felt like if one organization is funding them too much, we found that you take a little bit out of the hustle that planters need to do. So it forces the planter to get out there, building relationships, the collaboration, raising funds. And I think it helps the city. So.
Great. One question I want to ask the speakers, we've got a group of high capacity leaders on this call. We have people from many parts of the States and then a few friends from the global church. They've been listening in. What would be your challenge to them as they're thinking about this collaborative journey that may be new to them, maybe they're on it, but what would be some of the things that you could encourage them with as they are contemplating the journey ahead?
Yeah, I would say we talk about asking 3 questions with leaders like that are on this call that really begin to stir the missional imagination around what we've been talking about today. And the first question is, what does God want for my city or my county or region, wherever God's placed you? The second question is, what would it look like if God actually did that? And then the third question is, what would it take? What would it take from me? Those are just really good heart questions that help us to wrap our minds around the paradigm and scorecard changes that we're talking about today.
Love it. Anything else that you guys would add?
I think specifically too, if you're feeling like moved, compelled, called to kind of do this in your village, in your town, in your city, in your region, like, yeah, identify 5 or 6 other people, so you have this network of 4 to 6. Ask them, yeah, would you just journey with me for the next year? Let's get a lunch on the calendar every month for the next year, and let's work through those 3 questions that Will just gave us. And if God does something, great, we'll give him all the credit. And if nothing happens, we'll have had 12 great lunches and we'll be friends and we'll be better for it.
Right. Can't lose.
Right.
Can't lose.
Yeah. And I would be surprised if you don't end up like Rob's saying there, if you don't become friends on mission.
Yeah. All right, my friends, keep your questions going in the chat. Once again, in the honor of time, give it up for our speakers, if you will. My friends on mission, taking a step forward. I'm grateful for all of you. But let me end the call by just speaking to all of our friends who have gathered for this. What you're going to do coming out of the call is get an email from us. That email represents all 3 of our organizations and HCPN. And so what I mean by that is that we're going to try to be as clear as we can and say, what's your next step? We've got some ideas, but we're inviting you into that process. And so we'll work together. My friends from the global church, part of that could just be us connecting you with some more of our friends in the global church. But then the practical outcome, the call to action for some of you is to start a network. And we've got some training and coaching that we will offer you for free to do that. And then what we'll do is we'll walk alongside our friends collaboratively. And so if you say yes to that training that kicks off in September or October to start a network, we will be sharing that journey with our friends from Christ Together, from Exponential, from HCPN, to make sure that we're doing our best collectively to come alongside you and accommodate what God might be doing. I love the questions that Will set out. What does God want for my city, my region, my country, my village, my neighborhood? Those are all good questions. What would it look like? And then what would it take for me? And frankly, friends, this can be just a really great aspirational conversation until a few of us say, I'll be a network leader. I'll go first. I'll give this thing a shot because I know it's what Jesus wants. It's know how I'm wired. And if these organizations are willing to come alongside me, man, let's do this thing. And that's what I would pray, my friends, is that you would do something as a result of this. You'll be hearing from us, but in the meantime, I want to honor your time and the commitment that you made. You'll get all these resources, but give it up for the speakers and the case study leaders. Would you just give it up for me, please? You guys have been great. And I also want to give a big shout out to Sarah Jackaway, Sarah Williams, and a couple of other people on the NewThing team that, frankly, this could not be possible without them. They've been working behind the scenes on this, and I'm so grateful that we are friends on mission with it. And with that, I'm going to ask Sarah Williams to pray for us and end our time together. Will you do that, Sarah Williams?
Absolutely. Father God, we come to you this afternoon, this evening, and just give you thanks for the opportunity to collaborate. We thank you that you have provided us with the resources to help each other, and that your will is being done through all of this, Lord. We pray that during this call, if there were seeds that were planted, Lord, that you just help everyone take next steps to figure out how to achieve the goals that you've placed on our hearts. And Father God, we just pray that in these next hours and days moving forward, that if there are questions that are coming out of this, that you give us the resources to answer those. Lord, we thank you for these teams. We thank you for all of the individuals on this call and for the hearts of everyone who really just truly want to see your mission fulfilled. And we thank you so much. And it's in your holy and precious name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you all. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day, and you'll be hearing from us very soon. Talk soon.